guys, it's Kelly Latevola here, and I'm back with another video for Wplus9. We are currently celebrating the October 2016 release, and I'm like totally stoked about it. So this is we're going to be using Santa's Reindeer, a Holiday, Houses, and Be Merry sentiments. I wanted houses for like ever, and I kept telling Dawn that I wanted houses, and then when I opened my design team package, there were houses, and then there was lots of screaming and shrieking and jumping up and down because they are so cute. She totally did way better than I could ever even imagined. So anyway, we're going to be doing some stamping and some masking. I wanted to have some flying reindeer over this little village in a nighttime scene. So you see that I stamped the moon first and then I masked it. Don't do that. Like, just don't do it. Because when you remove the mask, then all of your antlers won't be there. The reindeer should have went down first, then he should have been masked, and then the moon should have went on. So don't make the same mistake I did. I didn't fix it because it ended up not being a big deal. It actually just happened to cut off the antler at a point where it totally made sense. So I was okay with that. But I wanted there to be like a couple of reindeer that were coming up, like they were the front of Santa's sleigh. So that is how I stamped them down. And then I used my grid paper to actually line up where my card was going to be. And then I stamped all of the houses on the same line of the grid paper, so just the roofs were kind of hanging over. But in order to vary them, I stamped them all the same on that same line because the heights were different. So I have this, I'm using Canson watercolor paper, I should have said that, and I'm using Wplus9 black ink because it is archival waterproof. Then I'm using this liquid frisket from Grumbacher, and you just paint it over whatever you want to mask and then let it dry completely, and then it will keep all of those areas clean while you watercolor around it. So just make sure before you do any kind of painting, adding any kind of water, that it's completely dry, and you can tell because it becomes a darker orange color and is kind of tacky. So I'm going to be using Zig Clean Color markers to do the background, and I just started with the moon where I knew that I wanted my color to be lightest, and then I just built out some darker blues, purples. I threw a little bit of pink in there because, hey, it's fun. And then the most outer edge I did in a navy. I usually do 2 coats of the Zig Clean Color markers just because I like a darker, bolder background, but you can stop at any point in which you're happy with it. And I'm just using a broad, flat brush to get some water on there and start them moving. Usually once you add water to these Zig Clean Color markers, they do all of the blending themselves. You don't have to do too much to it. They run like crazy. And I just worked in kind of like that circle shape so that it was blossoming out from my moon. I was being very careful though to make sure that it was the lightest around my moon. I didn't want my colors to get all muddy. And I'm mixing in between, or I'm rinsing in between colors so that the colors don't get super muddy. If you just drag the color from one area to the next, they become one solid color. So then I let that dry, and then I'm going to go back in and do that second layer. I felt like the bottom left-hand corner was not bright enough, so I started adding in some of those brighter blues over on top of it, and I liked that much, much better. The far background, not so much where the moon area is, but the darker part of the background, I'm not hugely concerned with because I know that I'm going to be adding some stars and some shimmer spray and some things for texture. So this is just trying to get me a base color that's really going to show off those stars and other things that I'm going to be adding to. And again, there's nothing wrong with watercolor background the way that it is the first step or this step. You can stop at any point that you're happy with it. It's your card. This is just something that I like to do, and the background does get a little bit busy or messy, but I think it's just kind of like a ton of fun to see all those little blossoms. So that's what I'm going to do, and as soon as I'm done here, just kind of mixing my color up a little bit, I'm going to go ahead and do that. And I do the shimmer spray while everything is still wet. If you do it while it's wet, it blossoms out into the water that's already there. if you do it while it's dry, it'll act almost like a like when you put water on distress ink and blot it up, it'll bleach it out in smaller areas. So I really just wanted a super lot of fun texture. So I also used a acrylic block and mixed up the navy blue and the black to have some darker spatters. Again, just trying to make the background a little bit more interesting. And then last, I'm going to use some white acrylic paint. And then I'm just going to put like a little dot of that down. I'm going to mix some water in there to get a good consistency for flicking. And I switched to a smaller, this is a number 2 round paintbrush to get a fine mist of droplets. Once all of that was dry, once all that was dry, I took it off the board, and then I'm going to go ahead and remove the liquid biscuit. And I just do that with my finger. But again, you want to make sure everything is dry. If your paper is still wet, you can tear it. All of that's done. I cut it down to the size of an A2 size card. And then I wanted, like I said, them to look like they were the lead of Santa's sleigh. So I'm just using a Copic Safe marker to draw on some little harnesses and then add in their little strings so that they are connected. Speaking of that marker, you did hear me say Copic Safe because we're going to be doing some Copic coloring. A word of note. W+9 black ink is not necessarily Copic friendly as soon as you stamp it down. But I have had very good luck with it in using this kind of technique where I do the watercoloring first and then the Copics after the fact. I don't know if the heat gun like bakes it or if it's just because it sat there for so long. But I even colored the moon with a really light yellow and I didn't get any bleeding. But use at your own risk. With the coloring of the reindeer, you have to pay attention to your light source. The moon is my light source. So most of the reindeer is going to be dark. This one that's in the lead in particular, the light is to the back right of it. So it would hit the left-hand side, well, the right-hand side of the reindeer's face. Right-hand side, like we're looking at it, right-hand side. And then it would also hit like the tops of his legs, which wouldn't be blocked by his body, his back legs, and the top of like his rump area. So that's how I'm doing my shading. I am shading the majority of it dark. And I know that this looks kind of scary because it's not like your traditional shading, but the end result is super cool and it makes a lot of sense once you see it kind of all put together. You can make your highlight as strong as you would like. You could even leave it like this, where it's just a super strong highlight. I am going to go back in and blend mine out just because that's how I prefer for it to look. So I started with my lightest color to lay in my shadows. This is because A, I get heavy-handed with my darks, and B, if you make a mistake, it's really easy to cover it up if it's your lightest color. It's much, much harder if you start with a darker color and then realize that you've made an error. So now that I'm done with my darkest color, I'm going to go back in and, like I said, start blending those lines out. You certainly do not have to do that. It's just going to be whatever look you're going for. I didn't want a super strong highlight. I wanted it more subtle. So just working my way back through, blending those all out. I used the same browns for the antlers as I did for the bodies of the reindeer. I had toyed with maybe doing something a little different, and then I to be honest, I didn't feel like such a small area was worth having to find a whole other color combination. I think it looks fine just the way that it is. So there again, I'm trying to pay attention to where the highlight and a low light would be. These are a little more difficult just because they are smaller. So for here, the reindeer, if you're looking at the card on the left-hand side, the highlight would be on the right, and the one on the right-hand side, it kind of curves over a little bit. So the highlight would probably be more in the middle because the moon's more directly behind it. But I got to be honest, even trying with a super light hand, it was almost impossible for me to get that kind of highlight. It was just too small of an area, and I couldn't get it done. For the two reindeer on the right, the moon is not hitting them at the same way. So their highlight is going to be on the left-hand side. I'm not going to show you the whole coloring because I did the exact same thing, but I just wanted you to see how I kind of laid in the shadows so you would see how it changed because of how the moon hit it. And it'll be much more apparent once the whole thing is colored. I just didn't think you'd want to see the same thing basically all over again. So there's all of our reindeer colored. And then for, they have collars on, little Jingle Bell collars, which are so cute. And then the little harnesses that I drew in. So I just picked a yellow-green combination. This is one of my favorite ones for Christmas time. And I'm doing the same thing. The darkest part is going to be on the main portion of the body, and then the lightest is really only going to be at that top part of his back where the moonlight would be hitting. For the collars, basically everything on the right-hand side is going to be darker. The light's going to hit the left-hand side. For the first one, I did color his nose red because Rudolph leads Santa's sleigh. I mean, we all know this. And then I did his collar in red, so I just kind of flip-flopped them. But again, paying attention to where that light source is. For the bells, I decided I was going to make them silver. And in order to do this, I used my gray markers. I colored all of them in with the C1, and then I started adding shading. So the bell that's directly in front of his neck is going to be nothing but dark. This is going to seem strange. It's okay. Just roll with it. It's all dark. No light's going to touch that bell. The ones on the sides, on the left-hand side, there's going to be a highlight on the left, and on the right-hand side, there's going to be a highlight on the right. We're moving on to the houses. I did all of my shading for the houses the same exact way. I left the highlight around the edges, and then I colored the darkest parts in the middle, and I used all the same C family. So for the top of the houses, the roofs, I did it just up to a C5 because it was meant to look like snow. For the actual houses, I went all the way down to 100 so that they would be super dark in that center. And I left the edges light because the moon is directly behind them. Once that was all done, I wanted to add some color, but it was just, to me, it just felt like too complicated. So if you don't have a lot of colors or you don't want to dig them all out, this is a really easy way to add good color. Do all of your shading with your grays and then pick a brighter color. This is that R29 that I used for the collars up there, and just go over the grays and it will give a cast to it. So the one house looks blue and the other one looks green and the other one looks red, but we only used one marker because we did all of the shading with the C's. So super handy trick if you don't have a ton of markers. Or if you're going on a trip, you don't want to pack a ton of markers. I used my white gel pen to add some highlights to the bells and then also to the snowy roofs. And I did it where the light would be hitting it the most. And this is where I realized that some of these roofs they wouldn't have light on the left or the right hand side. So I decided I was going to go in and fix it. Oh, another highlight on their little, I don't even know what they're called, harness, they're not leashes, they're something else, but I don't know the word. So here I'm going to go back in with my C3, and I'm just going to add some heavier shading. The one that's directly above the moon would actually have highlights on the left and the right. The one that's to the left of it would only have a highlight on the right, and the one that's to the right of it would only have a highlight on the left. So fix that all up, and then I'm going to go ahead and re-outline my images. I do this to all of my images. You don't necessarily have to, but especially with working on watercolor paper, it's super textured, so sometimes you don't get a great impression, especially if you're not using a Misty or some other stamping tool, so that might be something to just consider to kind of darken up your lines. I am in love with this font. Oh my goodness. I really love the font from the Be Merry Sentiments, and I can see myself using it just like a ton. Plus it has a banner with it. Hello, I love me a banner. So I'm going to go ahead and I treated my paper with the embossing buddy. Very important that you make sure everything is completely dry before you do this step because embossing powder will stick to anything, literally. So treat it and then stamp it in Versamark. I'm using white embossing powder. And then I'm just going to make sure everything's cleaned up, nothing's sticking where I don't want it. Though, really, to be honest, in this background, it doesn't make too much of a difference because if there was some white speckles, ain't nobody going to see that. Then I heat set that, and I'm nearly done with the card. All I really did after this was add some clear Wink of Stella just to the area where the highlights are. So thank you so much for joining me. If you have not seen the rest of the release, please head over to the Wplus9 blog. The link will be in the YouTube description below, and I will catch you guys in the next video. Bye.